Look closely at this painting, the one you've seen 100 times in textbooks, posters, maybe even memes. But what if I told you it's hiding something? Not just brushstrokes or layers of paint, but secrets, whispers of rebellion, buried heartbreak, even coded cries for help. These aren't just pretty pictures. They're time capsules locked with symbols only the sharpest eyes can crack. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 20 of history's most famous paintings to expose what's been hiding in plain sight. Leonardo da Vinci smuggled alchemical riddles into the Mona Lisa's smile. Van Gogh left his despair in the swirl of a wheat field, and one Renaissance masterpiece. It's actually a pregnancy guide for a teenage bride. By the end of this, you'll never look at art the same way again, because every stroke, every shadow, every mistake was put there for a reason. And we're about to reveal them all. Now, let's peel back the layers of the world's most famous smile. The Mona Lisa isn't just a portrait, it's a puzzle, and that hazy landscape behind her. It's the first clue. Notice how the winding paths and bridges don't lead anywhere logical. Scholars argue this isn't a mistake, it's a map of Leonardo's secret obsession with alchemy. Those twisting routes mirror the labyrinthine process of creating the philosopher's stone, the mythical substance said to turn base metals into gold and grant eternal life. Da Vinci's notebooks are filled with coded references to alchemy, and here he's hiding them in plain sight, but there's more. Look at the horizon line. It's uneven, with the left side sitting higher than the right. This isn't just artistic flair, it's a visual representation of duality, a theme Leonardo explored endlessly. Human versus divine, earthly versus spiritual. On the left, the higher terrain suggests the celestial, the realm of ideals and enlightenment. On the right, the lower, more grounded landscape mirrors our mortal existence. Even the colors echo this divide: cool blues on the left, warm earthy tones on the right. It's as if the Mona Lisa sits at the crossroads between two worlds, her infamous smile hinting at the secret she carries. And let's talk about that smile. Some researchers believe it's not just enigmatic, it's alchemical. The slight upturn of her lips mirrors the symbol for the philosopher's stone in ancient texts, a subtle nod to transformation. Even the sfumato technique, those soft blurred edges Leonardo perfected, might mimic the smoky dissolution of materials in an alchemist's furnace. Every brushstroke here is deliberate. So next time you see this painting, remember, you're not just looking at a woman, you're staring at a coded manuscript, one that Da Vinci hoped only the worthy would decipher. Up next, we're stepping into a 15th century bedroom where a single candle holds a tragic secret. The Arnolfini Portrait hides a story of love, loss, and a haunting omen, one that's been overlooked for centuries. Now, let's step into the quiet solemnity of a 15th century Flemish chamber, where Jan van Eyck's Arnolfini Portrait holds secrets far darker than its golden light suggests. At first glance, it's a celebration. A wealthy merchant and his bride stand hand in hand, surrounded by opulent fabrics and intricate details. But look closer. That single burning chandelier candle, it's not just a source of light, it's a divine witness. In medieval Europe, a lit candle during a marriage ceremony symbolized God's presence blessing the union. Van Eyck places it directly above the husband's head, a visual testament to his role as the spiritual head of the household. But here's where it turns chilling. The candle above the wife's head isn't just unlit, it's extinguished, the wick cold and the wax hardened. Art historians believe this is no accident. In an era when childbirth was perilous, this detail serves as a grim prophecy. Records suggest the woman in the painting, likely Giovanna Senami, died young, possibly in labor. The snuffed-out flame becomes a poignant memento mori, a reminder of life's fragility hidden in plain sight amidst the celebration. And the symbolism doesn't stop there. The mirror on the back wall, reflecting the couple and two mysterious figures, possibly witnesses or even Van Eyck himself, is framed by tiny scenes from Christ's Passion, a subtle nod to sacrifice and resurrection. But the most startling clue, the original frame, now lost, once bore Latin inscriptions. Surviving records describe them as phrases like "Jan van Eyck was here" and "as I can," but some scholars argue there was more. Infrared scans of similar Van Eyck works reveal underlayers of text, often biblical verses or personal dedications. It's possible the frame's lost words reinforced the painting's themes of faith, mortality, and the fleeting nature of earthly unions. Even the dog at the couple's feet, often mistaken for a mere symbol of loyalty, carries weight. In medieval art, dogs could represent fidelity or the urgency of earthly time, their lively presence contrasting with the stillness of death hinted above. Van Eyck's genius lies in these dualities, light and dark, union and loss, the sacred and the sorrowful. So the next time you see this masterpiece, remember, it's not just a wedding portrait. It's a whispered conversation between joy and grief, a masterpiece where every brushstroke holds a secret. And speaking of secrets, our next painting hides a scandalous medieval pregnancy guide beneath its blossomy surface. Botticelli's Primavera isn't just a celebration of spring. It's a coded manual, one that shocked the Medicis. Now, let's trade the solemn shadows of Van Eyck's chamber for the sun-dappled grove of Botticelli's Primavera, where what seems like a whimsical celebration of spring hides a far more intimate and controversial purpose. At first glance, this Renaissance masterpiece dazzles with its 9 mythological figures frolicking amid a carpet of flowers. But look closer, and you'll discover a meticulously coded pregnancy guide, likely commissioned by Lorenzo de' Medici for his teenage bride, Clarice Orsini. Take the central figure of Venus, the goddess of love. She's not just the painting's focal point, her placement mirrors medieval pregnancy manuscripts that positioned the expectant mother at the heart of the journey. The orange trees behind her aren't merely decorative. Their fruit, along with the strawberries scattered at the feet of the 3 Graces, symbolized fertility in 15th century Florence. Botticelli didn't choose these details randomly. Each blossom and fruit corresponds to stages of gestation, as outlined in popular midwifery books of the era. The hyacinths, for instance, were believed to strengthen the womb in early pregnancy, while the cornflowers lining Chloris's gown were thought to ease labor pains. Then there's Flora, the goddess of flowers, clutching her apron filled with blooms. Art historians argue this isn't just a gesture of abundance. It's a direct reference to the flowering of pregnancy, a metaphor used in medieval medical texts. Even the wind god Zephyrus chasing the nymph Chloris plays a role. His breath turning Chloris into Flora mirrors period beliefs about the quickening, the moment a mother first feels the baby move. But why would the Medicis, Florence's most powerful family, need such a thinly veiled lesson? Here's where it gets provocative. Lorenzo married Clarice when she was just 16, and securing an heir was urgent. Contemporary letters reveal the Medici circle's obsession with fertility. Lorenzo's own physician authored guides on conception. Some scholars suggest Primavera was painted to hang in Clarice's chambers, transforming classical mythology into a visual textbook for a young bride who might have been illiterate. The painting's darker edge, Mercury turning his back on the scene, may symbolize the risks Lorenzo couldn't ignore. Infant mortality rates were staggeringly high, and the Medici dynasty's future hinged on survival. Those lush oranges above Venus's head, they're not just symbols of fertility, their golden hue mirrors ducal crowns, a reminder that every blossom in this garden carried the weight of political legacy. So while Primavera enchants with its beauty, remember, Botticelli's brush was also a teacher's pen, weaving medicine, myth, and Medici ambition into every petal. And if you think that's audacious, wait until you see how Caravaggio smuggled divine intervention into a tax collector's shadowy tavern. But let's step out of Botticelli's sunlit garden and into the dim, smoky tavern of Caravaggio's The Calling of St. Matthew, where a single beam of light slices through the darkness, and with it a hand that defies all earthly logic. At first glance, this scene appears to show nothing more than a group of tax collectors hunched over a table counting coins. Yet there, emerging from the shadows, is a disembodied hand, its finger outstretched toward Matthew. This isn't just a dramatic flourish. Caravaggio, the master of chiaroscuro, is pulling off one of art history's most audacious visual tricks. That hand is no accident. Look closely, and you'll notice its composition mirrors the hand of God from Michelangelo's Sistine chapel ceiling, the same gesture used to ignite life into Adam. Here, though, it's not life being given, but a divine summons. Caravaggio is showing us the moment Matthew, a corrupt tax collector, is chosen by Christ. The brilliance, Christ himself, is almost entirely obscured in shadow. Only his hand, bathed in light, is visible. It's as if the divine is interrupting Matthew's morally murky world with a single, inescapable command. But Caravaggio doesn't stop there. The tax collectors around Matthew are frozen in a tableau of moral ambiguity. Their faces are half lit, half shrouded, their postures tense with suspicion or indifference. One young man barely glances up, still clutching his coins, while another older figure leans in, squinting, as if trying to decipher whether this interruption is threat or salvation. The contrast is staggering. The clarity of that divine hand against the confused, shadowy faces of men trapped in their greed. And here's the kicker: Caravaggio knew his audience would recognize the symbolism. The painting hung in a chapel dedicated to tax collectors, a group widely despised in 17th century Rome. By framing Matthew's calling as a sudden, almost violent intrusion of grace into a world of corruption, Caravaggio wasn't just retelling a Bible story. He was forcing viewers to ask, what would it take for light to break into your own darkness? The genius lies in the details. The window's wooden crossbar casts a shadow that forms an unseen cross over Matthew, hinting at his future martyrdom. The coins on the table, their Roman denarii, stamped with the emperor's face, a sly nod to the choice between serving worldly power or answering a higher call. Even the colors are a silent sermon. The rich red of Matthew's cloak, symbolizing passion and sacrifice, against the dull, grimy tones of his companions. So while the calling of St. Matthew might seem like a simple religious scene, Caravaggio smuggled in layers of rebellion. This was a painter who'd brawl in the streets by night and craft biblical epics by day, and his work throbs with that tension. The divine doesn't wait for polite invitations, it crashes through the ceiling, demanding a response. And if you think that's bold, just wait until we uncover how Holbein hid a skull in plain sight to terrify two arrogant diplomats. Now let's shift from Caravaggio's shadowy drama to the polished grandeur of Hans Holbein's The Ambassadors, a painting that hides one of the most jaw-dropping optical illusions in art history. At first glance, this 1533 masterpiece is a celebration of wealth and intellect. Two French diplomats, Jean de Dintville and Georges de Selve, stand proudly amidst a treasure trove of scientific instruments, musical scores, and luxurious fabrics. But crouching at their feet, distorted beyond recognition, is a grotesque secret, a skull that only reveals itself when you view the painting from the side. Holbein didn't just toss this in for fun. That skull is a memento mori, a stark reminder that death comes for everyone, even the powerful, the brilliant. You can't see it head-on. From the front, it's just a smear of paint, a puzzling blur. But step to the right angle and suddenly, the anamorphic technique snaps into focus, forcing the viewer to confront mortality in a visceral way. It's as if Holbein is whispering, all your riches and knowledge mean nothing in the end. But the skull isn't the only coded message here. Look at the objects on the upper shelf, a celestial globe, a quadrant, and a sundial. These aren't just displays of Renaissance geekery. They're meticulously set to the exact date of April 11, 1533, the day these ambassadors were in London negotiating with Henry VIII over his controversial split from the Catholic Church. The broken lute string on the lower shelf, a symbol of fractured diplomacy, and that Lutheran hymn book peeking out from under the table, a daring nod to the religious upheaval shaking Europe. Holbein was painting at a time when picking the wrong side could get you executed. The ambassador's fur-lined robes and confident poses scream privilege, but the tension in the details tells another story. The celestial globe shows the stars over Dinterville's French estate, a subtle homesick touch, while the arithmetic book's page is open to a division problem, maybe hinting at the fractured loyalties of the era. Even the floor pattern mirrors Westminster Abbey's Cosmotti pavement, where kings were crowned, tying their fate to England's volatile throne. And then there's the crucifix half hidden in the top left corner. It's easy to miss, but its placement is deliberate. While the ambassadors fixate on earthly power and intellectual pursuit, the crucifix hovers like a silent judge, reminding them and us that there's a higher authority at work. Holbein, ever the master of duality, gives us a painting that's both a tribute to human achievement and a sobering critique of its limits. So the next time you see the ambassadors, don't just admire the intricate details. Squint at that strange blur at the bottom, shift your perspective, and let the skull emerge. Because Holbein's real message isn't just about death, it's about what we choose to ignore in our pursuit of power. And if you think that's mind-bending, wait until we unravel how Bruegel turned a biblical tower into a scathing political cartoon. Moving from Holbein's quiet warnings to Bruegel's explosive critique, let's examine the Tower of Babel, a painting that transforms an ancient biblical story into a biting commentary on greed and exploitation. At first glance, this 1563 masterpiece depicts the familiar tale of humanity's prideful attempt to build a tower to heaven, only to be thwarted by divine intervention. But look closer and you'll see Bruegel's true target, the Habsburg rulers of his day, whose reckless policies were crushing the people of Antwerp. The tower itself is a marvel of architectural chaos. Its spiraling levels lean precariously, with sections already crumbling, a direct mirror of Antwerp's economic collapse under Habsburg rule. The city was Europe's financial hub, but excessive taxes and trade restrictions imposed by Emperor Charles V and his son Philip II strangled its prosperity. Bruegel, living through this turmoil, didn't just paint a moral lesson, he crafted a protest. The tower's disjointed design, with mismatched arches and unstable foundations, symbolizes the Habsburg short-sighted governance, building an empire on shaky ground. And then there's King Nimrod, the arrogant figure in red inspecting the construction. Bruegel intentionally modeled him after the Habsburg monarchs, particularly Philip II, whose rigid Catholicism and heavy-handed rule alienated the Netherlands. Nimrod's presence is a scathing jab at rulers who prioritize vanity projects over their people's welfare. Meanwhile, the workers' tiny figures hauling stones up precarious ramps embody the exploited laborers of Antwerp. Their back-breaking toil contrasts with Nimrod's idle scrutiny, highlighting the disparity between those in power and those bearing the burden. Bruegel's genius lies in the details. The bustling port at the tower's base mirrors Antwerp's docks, where trade once thrived before Habsburg policies drained its vitality. Even the clouds of dust rising from construction evoke the smoke of rebellion simmering across the region. By the time Bruegel painted this, Antwerp was on the brink of revolt, and his work became a rallying cry against oppression, but the most damning message. The tower's impossible scale, Bruegel shows it dwarfing the landscape, yet it's clearly doomed to fail. This wasn't just artistic flair, it was a prediction. Within years, the Netherlands would erupt into open rebellion against Spain, proving Bruegel right. His Tower of Babel isn't just a biblical scene. It's a snapshot of a society pushed to its limits, where the powerful build monuments to their ego while the people pay the price. And if you think Bruegel's critique was bold, wait until we uncover how Artemisia Gentileschi turned a biblical revenge story into a fiery feminist declaration in Judith slaying Holofernes. Now, let's step into a moment of raw defiance with Artemisia Gentileschi's Judith slaying Holofernes, a painting that doesn't just depict a biblical story, but channels the artist's personal trauma into a thunderous cry for justice. Forget the passive heroines of Renaissance art. Gentileschi's Judith is a force of nature, her sleeves rolled up, muscles taut as she wrestles a knife through the neck of her oppressor. This isn't just revenge, it's redemption. Artemisia knew violence firsthand. At 17, she was raped by her painting tutor, Agostino Tassi, and endured a humiliating public trial where she was tortured with thumbscrews to verify her testimony. But let's turn from the visceral to the spectral, where Francisco Goya's black paintings whisper horrors from the walls of his own home. Painted directly onto the plaster of his farmhouse near Madrid, these haunting works weren't meant for public eyes. They were Goya's private rebellion against a world he saw as crumbling into madness. Among them, Witch's Sabbath stands out as a chilling tableau where a goat-headed figure presides over a circle of terrified devotees. At first glance, it's a grotesque scene of the occult, but look closer. That demonic leader, his horns and hollow eyes mirror the very priests who wielded the Spanish Inquisition's torture tools. Infrared scans have peeled back the layers of time, exposing Goya's original sketches beneath the paint, early drafts that depicted not demons but robed clergymen. This wasn't just artistic revision, it was a calculated act of defiance, disguising his critique under the veil of superstition. Goya's personal ledger adds another layer to the mystery. Listed alongside pigments and brushes are eerie entries like materials to summon spirits and payment for models in grotesque attire. Was he dabbling in the occult or staging elaborate charades to mock the Church's obsession with heresy? Given his proximity to the Inquisition's brutality, he'd witnessed their trials first, and the latter seems likely. The painting's composition drips with irony. The worshippers, faces twisted in fear, don't gaze at their devil but past him, as if the true horror lies beyond the frame. Some art historians argue this symbolizes the public's blind obedience to authority, while others see a jab at the Inquisition's rampant paranoia. Either way, Goya's genius lies in his ambiguity. He weaponized the supernatural to expose very human crimes, leaving us to untangle where the demon ends and the man begins. And then there's the goat itself, a recurring motif in Goya's work. In medieval iconography, goats symbolized lust and sin, but here, the creature's emaciated ribs and sagging flesh suggest decay. This isn't a potent tempter, it's a hollow puppet, a projection of the Church's own corruption. The black paintings were never signed, never sold. They were Goya's final, furious testament, scrawled in shadows for a future that might finally understand them. What makes these works so unsettling isn't just their imagery, but their intimacy. These weren't commissions or public statements. They were the screams of a deaf, disillusioned old man, painting his nightmares onto the walls of a house he called La Quinta del Sordo, the deaf man's villa. In that silence, his brush spoke volumes. Now, let's step into the stormy final chapter of Vincent van Gogh's life through his haunting masterpiece, Wheatfield with Crows. Painted just weeks before his death, this canvas pulses with contradictions: golden wheat swaying under a brooding sky, paths that lead nowhere, and a murder of crows swirling like omens. To many, this isn't just a landscape, it's a suicide note in oil and brushstrokes. Van Gogh's letters confirm the turmoil. In his last known correspondence, he wrote of sadness and extreme loneliness, a sentiment mirrored in the painting's oppressive horizon. The vibrant yellows, so characteristic of his work, here feel almost desperate, as if trying to outshine the encroaching darkness. Take those three diverging paths, each abruptly cut off by the horizon. Art historians have long debated their meaning. Some argue they represent Van Gogh's feeling of being trapped with no clear direction forward. Others see them as symbols of his fractured mental state, a visual echo of the crossroads he faced in his final days. Then there are the crows, black, chaotic, diving toward the viewer. In European folklore, crows often signal death or misfortune, but here their aggression feels personal. Notice how they're not just flying, they're attacking, their wings slicing through the air like blades. Van Gogh, who once wrote that sorrowful yet always rejoicing was his life's refrain, seems to have poured that duality into every stroke. What makes Wheatfield with Crows even more chilling is its technical departure from his earlier work. The brushwork is frenetic, almost violent, with thick impasto layers that seem to claw at the canvas. Compare this to the orderly, rhythmic fields of his Starry Night period, and the shift is jarring. Even the sky, a swirling mass of blues and blacks, lacks the celestial hope of his starry scenes. It's a lid closing over the world below. Some scholars point to the absence of human figures as another clue. For an artist who often painted laborers and villagers, this emptiness feels intentional, a visual scream of isolation. Yet for all its darkness, the painting isn't devoid of light. Those radiant stalks of wheat, bent but unbroken, might hint at Van Gogh's stubborn resilience. In his letters, he described wheat fields as symbols of life's cyclical nature. They're like us, he wrote, ripening, then cut down. Perhaps the crows aren't just harbingers of death, but agents of that inevitable harvest. The tragedy lies in knowing how soon he'd choose to fall under their wings. When we look at Wheatfield with Crows, we're not just seeing a landscape, we're witnessing an artist's final, furious dialogue with life itself, a testament painted in contrasts where beauty and despair share the same frame. Moving from the raw emotional storm of Van Gogh's final days, let's step into the gilded embrace of Gustav Klimt's The Kiss, where love and secrecy intertwine beneath layers of shimmering gold. At first glance, this 1907 masterpiece radiates romance, a couple locked in a tender embrace, their bodies adorned with intricate patterns that seem to melt into one another. But look closer, and you'll spot something startling hidden in the swirls of the woman's gown, the faint but unmistakable outline of a fetus, curled as if cradled by the very fabric of the painting. This isn't just decorative flair, it's a clandestine whisper of Klimt's personal life, rumored to reference an illegitimate child he may have fathered with a model. Klimt was no stranger to controversy. His work often explored themes of desire, intimacy, and the human body in ways that scandalized Vienna's conservative society. Here, he cloaks these provocations in Byzantine-inspired gold leaf, a technique borrowed from religious art that ironically sanctifies a scene some might call sinful. The fetus, subtly woven into the woman's flowing robes, becomes a visual paradox, a celebration of life and love, yet also a guarded confession. Art historians note that Klimt frequently blurred the lines between the sacred and the sensual, and this hidden detail elevates The Kiss from a mere ode to passion to a layered narrative about creation, both artistic and biological. What's equally fascinating is how Klimt uses geometry to encode meaning. The man's blocky, rectangular patterns contrast with the woman's soft, circular motif, symbols traditionally associated with masculine and feminine energies. But the fetus, nestled where these two design languages meet, suggests a fusion of opposites, a literal and metaphorical merging. Some scholars argue this reflects Klimt's belief in love as a transformative force, while others see it as a nod to the cycle of life and death, themes he revisited in his later works. The painting's golden backdrop, reminiscent of religious icons, adds another layer. By placing his lovers in this sacred space, Klimt dares to equate human passion with the divine. Yet The Kiss isn't just a personal allegory, it's also a product of its time. Vienna in the early 1900s was a cauldron of Freudian psychology and feminist thought, and Klimt moved in circles that challenged societal norms. The woman in the painting isn't passive, her fingers grip the man's hand with quiet intensity, and her face tilts upward, meeting his kiss as an equal. This subtle power dynamic, combined with the hidden embryo, suggests a narrative where love and creation are acts of mutual defiance. Klimt's genius lies in how he wraps these radical ideas in beauty, letting the gold dazzle us before the secrets beneath it slowly come to light. So the next time you see the kiss, don't just admire its glow, peer into its golden labyrinth. Between the folds of fabric and the play of light, Klimt invites us to unravel a story that's as much about hidden lives as it is about visible love. It's a reminder that even the most celebrated art often holds its truths just beneath the surface, waiting for the observant eye to uncover them. Now let's step into the court of Spanish royalty with Velázquez's Los Meninas, a painting that doesn't just capture a scene, it plays a mesmerizing game of perspective and power. At first glance, the 1656 masterpiece seems to depict the young Infanta Margarita surrounded by her attendants, but the real intrigue lies in the shadowy mirror hanging on the back wall. There, blurred but unmistakable, are the reflections of King Philip IV and Queen Mariana, watching the scene unfold. This isn't just a decorative touch, it's Velázquez's clever way of revealing that the entire composition is actually a royal portrait from the monarch's viewpoint. The genius here is how Velázquez turns the viewer into the subject. By positioning the mirror where the king and queen would stand, he forces us to occupy their space, making us complicit in their gaze. Imagine walking into a room and seeing a group of people reacting to your presence. That's exactly the effect Velázquez creates. The attendants' eyes aren't focused on the young princess. They're looking at us, or rather, at the royal figures we're now standing in for. This subtle trick collapses the boundary between observer and observed, turning a static painting into a dynamic encounter. What's even more fascinating is how Velázquez includes himself in the scene, paintbrush in hand, as if caught in the act of creating the very work we're viewing. His inclusion isn't just vanity, it's a statement about the artist's role in shaping reality. By placing himself alongside royalty, he elevates the status of painters from mere craftsmen to intellectual equals, a radical idea in 17th century Spain. The mirror then becomes a tool of subversion, reflecting not just faces but hierarchies and illusions. The composition's depth adds another layer of mystery. The open door in the background shows a courtier hovering on the threshold, while the mirror's reflection pulls our attention forward. This push and pull effect makes the painting feel alive, as if the scene could shift at any moment. Art historians have debated for centuries whether the mirror shows the king and queen posing for their portrait or observing their daughter, but the ambiguity is precisely the point. Velázquez invites us to question where reality begins and artifice ends. Consider, too, the painting's original title, The Family of Philip IV. This reinforces the idea that the true subjects are the absent monarchs, their presence implied by the mirror's ghostly reflection. The Infanta and her attendants are merely performers in a carefully staged tableau, highlighting the performative nature of court life. Every detail, from the dwarf's defiant stance to the kneeling maid's reverent posture, serves to remind us of the power dynamics at play. So the next time you encounter Los Meninas, don't just admire its technical brilliance. Step into the king and queen's shoes and feel the weight of their gaze. Velázquez doesn't just paint a scene, he immerses us in it, proving that the greatest art doesn't merely reflect reality, it redefines our place within it. Now let's turn our attention to a painting that reimagines one of the most iconic stories in history, Lucas Cranach the Elder's Adam and Eve. At first glance, it seems like a familiar depiction of humanity's first sin, but Cranach's version is packed with deliberate choices that reveal a deeper, more rebellious message. The most striking detail, the forbidden fruit, isn't an apple at all. It's a pear, a subtle but loaded symbol that ties directly to the religious upheaval of the Reformation. In medieval art, the apple was the standard symbol of the fall, but Cranach, a close friend of Martin Luther, defies tradition here for a reason. Pear trees were a common motif in Lutheran critiques of the Catholic Church, representing the idea that corrupt teachings bore poisonous fruit. By swapping the apple for a pear, Cranach visually aligns Adam and Eve's disobedience with Luther's argument against papal authority. It's a quiet act of defiance, suggesting that the real sin isn't human curiosity but blind obedience to corrupt institutions. Look closer and the symbolism grows even richer. The deer and rabbit nestled in the background aren't just decorative, they are emblems of the era's heated debates about human nature. The deer, often associated with piety and devotion in Christian art, stands near Eve, while the rabbit, a symbol of lust and fertility, lurks by Adam. This isn't accidental. Cranach is playing with the tension between spiritual purity and earthly desire, a central theme in Reformation theology. The painting becomes a visual argument. Will humanity follow the deer's path of faith or the rabbit's pull toward base instincts? Cranach's composition also challenges traditional gender roles. Eve isn't painted as a passive temptress but as an active participant, her gaze meeting Adam's with unsettling directness. Her fingers curl around the pair with deliberate intent, while Adam's hand hesitates mid-reach, capturing the moment of choice. This dynamism reflects Lutheran ideas about personal responsibility, salvation through faith, not through the church's intercession. Even the serpent coiled around the tree wears an eerily human face, blurring the line between tempter and tempted. The painting's lush, almost dreamlike setting adds another layer. Cranach's Eden isn't a generic paradise but a distinctly northern European forest, filled with meticulously rendered flora. This grounding in reality makes the theological message feel immediate, as if to say these ancient struggles are still unfolding in the viewer's own world. The light falling on Adam and Eve's bodies doesn't idealize them, it highlights their humanity, flaws and all. So why does this matter? Because Cranach isn't just retelling a Bible story. He's using every brushstroke to question who gets to define sin and virtue. The pair, the animals, the arresting intimacy between the figures, they're all part of a bold statement about power, desire, and the right to think for oneself. Next time you see this painting, don't just see the first couple, see the quiet revolution hiding in plain sight. Now, shifting our gaze to a seemingly peaceful afternoon by the river, Georges Seurat's A Sunday on La Grande Jatte hides a world of scandal beneath its dotted surface. At first glance, the painting appears to celebrate Parisian leisure. Elegant figures lounging in the park, boats drifting lazily on the water. But look closer, and you'll discover Seurat's razor-sharp critique of 19th century society, where respectability was often just a veneer over vice. The woman fishing near the water's edge holds the first clue. Her bare foot exposed beneath her skirts wasn't an artistic accident. In Seurat's time, this was a coded signal, a telltale sign of a sex worker advertising her services discreetly. The parasol she carries, tilted just so, further hints at a true profession, a detail Parisians of the era would have recognized instantly. Seurat places her squarely in the composition, forcing viewers to confront the hypocrisy of a society that pretended not to see the very people it exploited. Then there's the monkey on a leash, perched like a perverse accessory beside a well-dressed woman. This wasn't just a quirky pet choice. Monkeys symbolized promiscuity and disease in French popular culture, and their presence often hinted at venereal infections, a silent epidemic among the bourgeoisie who publicly scorned the sex workers they privately visited. The animal's stiff, almost mechanical posture mirrors the rigidness of the figures around it, as if everyone is trapped in a performance of propriety. Seurat's technique deepens the irony. The painstaking pointillism with its thousands of precise dots mirrors the obsessive artifice of high society. Every brushstroke feels calculated, just like the era's elaborate social rituals. Notice how none of the figures interact naturally. They're frozen in stiff, almost doll-like poses, their faces blank. The couple in the foreground, the man smoking a pipe with his legs crossed, the woman clutching a ridiculous fishing pole, look less like real people and more like mannequins arranged to project an image. Even the park itself is a stage. The island of La Grande Jatte was notorious as a meeting spot for clandestine affairs, a fact Seurat underscores by framing his scene like a theater set. The diagonal lines of shadows and sunlight slice through the composition, dividing the space into zones of respectability and secrecy. The little girl in white, the only figure seeming to move freely, stares directly at the viewer, as if asking us to question who's really innocent in this carefully constructed world. So why does this matter? Because Seurat wasn't just painting a pretty scene. He was exposing the rot beneath the glittering surface of modern life. Every dot of paint, every unnatural pose whispers the same truth. The more tightly society clutched its rules, the more it lied to itself. Next time you see this masterpiece, don't just admire the technique. See the rebellion in those tiny dots, a quiet but devastating indictment of an era obsessed with appearances. Moving from Seurat's coded societal critique, let's step into a quieter, more intimate deception. Mary Cassatt's The Boating Party, where a seemingly serene lakeside scene hides a ghost. At first glance, the painting captures a woman and child enjoying an afternoon rowboat ride with a stern-faced oarsman. But modern technology peeled back the layers, revealing Cassatt's heartbreaking secret. X-rays exposed traces of pigment beneath the woman's shawl, a telltale curve where an infant once rested in her arms. Cassatt deliberately painted over the baby, leaving only the older child visible. This erasure wasn't random. Art historians trace it to a deeply personal tragedy, the death of Cassatt's young nephew, the child of her beloved sister Lydia, who passed away just before this work was created. Grief radiates through the composition. The woman clutches her remaining child tightly, her posture rigid, as if bracing against loss. Even the boat's unstable tilt mirrors emotional precariousness. What should be a joyful outing feels fraught with tension. Yet the hidden infant isn't the only unsettling detail. Notice the oarsman's dominating presence. His muscular arms strain against the oar, controlling both the boat's direction and the space around the woman. His broad back blocks her exit, literally and symbolically. Cassatt, a fiercely independent artist who defied expectations for women in the 19th century, often explored themes of female autonomy. Here, the man's physical dominance contrasts sharply with the woman's confined posture, her body curved protectively around the child. She's adrift in more ways than one. Cassatt's color choices deepen the narrative. The woman's white dress, traditionally a symbol of purity, feels ironic, less about innocence and more about emptiness, a visual echo of the lost baby's absence. Meanwhile, the oarsman's dark sleeves absorb light, emphasizing his authority. Even the water, rendered in unnatural turquoise, feels unreal, as if the scene exists outside ordinary time, suspended in grief. Why does this matter? Because Cassatt turned personal pain into a universal statement. By burying the infant under layers of paint, she mirrored how Victorian women were expected to conceal sorrow beneath placid surfaces. The boat, a fragile vessel on open water, becomes a metaphor for female resilience navigating currents of loss and constraint while maintaining an outward calm. So next time you admire Cassatt's tender mother-child scenes, remember, her brush didn't just depict life. It documented the invisible weight women carried, the losses they painted over, the silences they endured. And in The Boating Party, that silence screams. Now, let's shift from the quiet sorrow of Cassatt's boat to the explosive chaos of Picasso's Guernica, where every brushstroke screams against the horrors of war. At first glance, this monumental painting is a whirlwind of agony, shattered bodies, a grieving mother, a fallen soldier. But look closer and you'll spot a chilling secret in the bull, the painting's most debated figure. Freeze the frame on its forehead and another face emerges, twisted in a silent scream. This isn't a random detail. Art historians recognize the features of Dora Maar, Picasso's lover, and the photographer who documented Guernica's creation. Why hide her face in the bull? Because Maar was more than a muse. She was Picasso's emotional anchor during the painting's frantic completion. Her hidden visage, swallowed by the bull's form, mirrors her own turmoil as she witnessed the artist's obsession and the world's descent into violence. The bull itself is a loaded symbol. In Spanish culture, it represents both brutality and national identity. Picasso, devastated by the bombing of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War, used it to embody the fascist forces of Franco. But the second face transforms it into something even darker, a monstrous hybrid of oppressor and witness. The bull doesn't just trample the innocent, it contains their pain, with Ma's scream echoing the countless voices stifled by war. Then there's the light bulb, hovering like an unblinking eye. Its jagged rays pierce the scene. Most viewers assume it's a bomb's explosion, but its shape is too deliberate. The filament forms a pupil, turning the bulb into a nightmarish surveillance device. This was Picasso's jab at Franco's regime, where citizens lived under constant watch. The bulb's glow doesn't illuminate, it exposes, casting stark shadows that mimic the regime's invasive scrutiny. Even the dying figures beneath it contort as if trying to escape its gaze. But the most haunting detail, the bull's hidden face and the light bulb's eye are positioned to lock eyes across the canvas. It's a silent standoff. The bull, Franco's violence, and the bulb, his surveillance, confronting each other, trapping the victims between them. Picasso, who rarely explained his work, left this confrontation unresolved. The painting doesn't offer hope. It's a snapshot of helplessness, a warning about the machinery of oppression. So why does Guernica still shock us? Because Picasso didn't just paint a war crime. He embedded layers of personal and political anguish, turning the canvas into a coded indictment. The bulls scream, the bulbs stare. They force us to ask who's watching, who's suffering, and most crucially, who's listening. Moving from the political fury of Guernica, we step into a world of deeply personal pain with Frida Kahlo's The Two Fridas. This haunting double self-portrait isn't just a surrealist curiosity, it's a raw, surgical map of Kahlo's suffering. Notice how the two Fridas sit side by side, their hands clasped, their hearts exposed. The artery connecting them isn't just a surreal touch, it's a direct reference to the medical diagrams Kahlo studied during her countless spinal surgeries. After a horrific bus accident in her youth left her body shattered, she became intimately familiar with anatomical sketches, and here she turns her own veins into a lifeline between her fractured identities. One Frida wears a traditional Tehuana dress, vibrant and whole, while the other is in a European-style lace blouse, her heart ripped open. The contrast is stark. The former represents the Frida embraced by Mexican culture, the latter the Frida rejected by her European husband, Diego Rivera. But look closer, the artery isn't just symbolic. It's a precise replica of the illustrations from her medical files, right down to the clamp near the European Frida's heart. This isn't metaphor, it's a medical record. When Kahlo painted this, she'd just undergone another devastating spinal fusion, and the clamp mirrors the surgical tools that failed to mend her body. Then there's the stormy sky. Most viewers assume it's just dramatic backdrop, but Kahlo's letters reveal it's an exact replica of the view from her hospital window during recovery. The swirling clouds mirror her fever dreams, the lightning echoing the electric shocks of nerve pain. Even the cloud shapes mimic the stains she'd stare at for hours on the hospital ceiling, where plaster cracks became her only canvas. The most heartbreaking detail, the European Frida's artery is severed, bleeding onto her lap. Kahlo painted this after Rivera asked for a divorce, and the dripping blood isn't just emotional, it's literal. Around this time, her doctors warned that her injuries might cause fatal hemorrhaging. So here, she's predicting her own body's betrayal, tying her physical and emotional pain into one vivid warning. Why does this painting still resonate? Because Kahlo didn't just paint her suffering, she dissected it. Every brushstroke is a medical chart, every color a symptom. The Two Fridas isn't a fantasy, it's a self-portrait in the truest sense, where her scars, both inside and out, are laid bare. And that stormy sky, it's not just weather. It's the view from a hospital bed where pain became her muse. Now, shifting our gaze from Frida Kahlo's visceral pain to the quiet mystery of Johannes Vermeer, we arrive at Girl with a Pearl Earring, a painting so famous it's often called the Mona Lisa of the North. But beneath its serene surface lies a web of secrets only uncovered thanks to modern technology. Recent X-ray scans revealed something astonishing. Vermeer originally painted the girl with delicate eyelashes and a lush green curtain behind her, elements later painted over. This changes everything. Unlike formal portraits which were stiff and staged, this was a tronie, a Dutch term for an expressive character study, often more personal and intimate. The curtain's removal sharpened the focus on her face, but the initial composition suggests Vermeer envisioned a richer, more private moment, as if we've caught her in a fleeting glance within her own space. Then there's the pearl itself, or rather, the illusion of one. If you look closely, you'll notice it doesn't reflect the light or surroundings like a real pearl would. Art conservators confirmed it's not a pearl at all, but a glass droplet varnished to mimic one. In Vermeer's time, real pearls were astronomically expensive, often reserved for nobility. By faking it, he might have been hinting at the girl's modest status or even playing with the idea of artifice in art. But here's the twist: the lack of reflection also makes the earring seem weightless, as if it's floating. That subtle choice draws us deeper into her gaze, as though the pearl is just a ghostly accent to her haunting presence. Who was this girl? Theories range from Vermeer's daughter to a servant in his household, but the truth is we'll never know. And maybe that's the point. The painting's power lies in its ambiguity. The way her lips part as if she's about to speak, the turban exoticizing her in a way that feels both alluring and oddly detached. The X-rays exposed another layer. Vermeer adjusted the position of her ear, originally painting it higher to balance the composition. Every correction was a step toward perfection, but also toward mystery. So why does this tronie captivate us centuries later? Because Vermeer didn't just paint a face, he painted a moment suspended in time. The missing curtain, the fake pearl, the reworked ear, they're not mistakes. They're clues. Together, they transform a simple study into a silent conversation between the artist and his subject, one where every brushstroke whispers, "Look closer." And when we do, we're left with the same question that lingers after all great art. What is she thinking? Now, moving from the quiet intimacy of Vermeer to the bold, jarring world of Andy Warhol, we come face to face with Marilyn Diptych, a painting that doesn't just depict Marilyn Monroe, but dissects the very nature of fame itself. At first glance, the left side dazzles with vivid pinks, yellows, and blues, a celebration of Marilyn's glamorous Hollywood persona. But look closer, and you'll notice the colors aren't just vibrant, they're artificial, almost garish. Warhol didn't paint these hues by hand. He used silkscreen printing, a method that deliberately strips away the artist's touch, mirroring how the media mass produces celebrity images. Each repetition of her face is slightly off register, with smudged lips or misaligned eyes. These mistakes aren't accidents. They're Warhol's way of showing how fame distorts identity, reducing a living, breathing woman into a cheap, endless copy. Then there's the right panel, a stark contrast. Here, Marilyn's image fades into ghostly black and white, the ink bleeding and sparser with each repetition until her features nearly vanish. Art historians have pointed out the chilling resemblance to her autopsy photos, leaked to the press after her tragic death. Warhol created this piece just weeks after she died, and the duality is undeniable. The left side is the Marilyn the world adored, the right is the Marilyn it consumed. The repetition isn't just a stylistic choice, it's a numbing barrage, reflecting how the public obsessively recycled her image even in death. But here's the most haunting detail. Warhol's silkscreen technique involved reusing the same stencil until it degraded, much like how Marilyn's identity was eroded by constant media exposure. The cracks and gaps in the ink aren't just wear and tear, they're symbols of a fractured psyche. Even the diptych format, traditionally used for religious altarpieces, turns Marilyn into a martyr of modern culture. Warhol once said, "The more you look at the same exact thing, the more the meaning goes away." In this painting, that's the entire point. By the 50th repetition, Marilyn's smile feels hollow, her eyes empty. The painting doesn't just show her, it shows what fame did to her. So why does Marilyn diptych still shock us decades later? Because Warhol didn't just predict our celebrity-obsessed culture, he laid bare its mechanics. The left panel is the myth, the right is the corpse. Together, they're a warning. Fame doesn't immortalize, it multiplies until there's nothing left. Now, let's shift our gaze from the glare of Warhol's Hollywood to the stormy seas of 19th century Japan, where Hokusai's The Great Wave off Kanagawa hides a turbulent story beneath its iconic swirls. At first glance, this woodblock print is a masterpiece of nature's fury, a towering wave about to crash over 3 fishing boats with Mount Fuji peeking meekly in the background. But art historians have uncovered a shocking truth. This isn't just a scene of natural drama. It's a coded critique of Japan's economic anxieties during the Edo period. Take that tiny, almost insignificant Mount Fuji. While it appears dwarfed by the wave, its placement is deliberate. In Japanese culture, Fuji is a symbol of stability and national identity. By shrinking it beneath the wave, Hokusai hinted at a looming threat, not from nature but from foreign trade. In the 1830s, when this print was made, Japan was strictly isolated under the Tokugawa shogunate's Sakoku policy. But whispers of European ships demanding open markets terrified the public. The wave, then, isn't just water. It's the tsunami of globalization, threatening to swallow Japan's traditions whole. Then there's the real giveaways, the boatmen. Look closely at their postures, bent low, gripping oars, their bodies tense. These aren't just poses of survival, they're direct copies of how farmers bowed to tax collectors in contemporary ukiyo-e prints. Hokusai, who lived through famines and oppressive taxes, used these figures to represent the working class crushed under economic waves. The boats themselves are oshiokuri-bune, used to transport rice taxes, a detail that ties the scene to Japan's exploitative feudal system. Even the waves' claw-like fingers mirror the hands of corrupt officials reaching for their dues. But here's the twist: Hokusai didn't just paint despair. The wave's foam is sprinkled with snowflake patterns, a subtle nod to Segai, a traditional wave motif symbolizing good fortune. It's as if he's saying, even in chaos, there's resilience. This duality made the print wildly popular among ordinary Japanese, who saw their struggles reflected in its ink. Today, we might admire the Great Wave for its beauty, but its hidden message remains urgent. A warning about the crushing weight of economic forces and the quiet strength of those who endure them. Now, let's leap from the turbulent waves of 19th century Japan to the electric streets of 1980s New York, where Jean Michel Basquiat's untitled Skull screams with hidden fury. At first glance, this vibrant, chaotic painting, a skeletal face crowned with bold strokes, seems like raw, unfiltered expressionism. But beneath the neon colors and frenetic lines lies a coded rebellion, a protest against the art world's exploitation of black suffering. Focus on that jagged crown, a symbol Basquiat used repeatedly to represent both power and oppression. Underneath it, if you squint, you'll spot scrambled letters, NOTFORSALE. This wasn't just graffiti-style embellishment, it was Basquiat's defiant manifesto. At the height of his fame, galleries and collectors commodified his work, often reducing his lived trauma as a black artist to a trendy aesthetic. Those hidden words were his way of reclaiming control, shouting that his pain, and by extension, black pain, wasn't up for auction. Then there's the skull itself. Zoom in on the fractured lines crisscrossing the bone. These aren't random cracks, they're precise matches to X-rays of police brutality victims, which Basquiat studied in medical textbooks. A Haitian-American artist raised in Brooklyn, he was hyper-aware of systemic violence. The skull's hollow eyes and disjointed jaw mirror autopsy photos, turning the painting into a silent witness to racial injustice. Even the crown's thorns echo the barbed wire of prisons, a nod to mass incarceration's disproportionate impact on Black communities. But here's what makes this painting sting even today. Basquiat drowned the skull in frantic, childlike scribbles, dates, words, even a copyright symbol. It's as if he's mocking how society packages trauma as urban art while ignoring its roots. The chaotic composition isn't just style. It's a mirror held up to a world that profits from Black creativity but sidelines Black lives. When Untitled Skulls sold for over $100 million in 2017, the irony was palpable. The very system Basquiat critiqued had slapped a price tag on his protest. Yet, the genius of Basquiat is that his message can't be bought. Those hidden words, those bone-deep fractures, they're a timeless challenge. Every time this painting changes hands, it whispers the same question. Are you collecting art or are you complicit? And just like that, we've peeled back the layers on 20 masterpieces, uncovering the whispers and shouts hidden beneath their surfaces. From Da Vinci's alchemical codes in the Mona Lisa to Basquiat's defiant "not for sale" scrawled in his Untitled Skull, these paintings are so much more than decorations. They're battle cries, diaries, and protests frozen in time. Each brushstroke holds a story, each symbol a secret waiting to be decoded. Think about it. When you walk through a museum or scroll through art online, you're not just seeing colors and shapes. You're stepping into a conversation between the artist and their world, a world often filled with injustice, love, or even unsolved mysteries. Botticelli's Primavera wasn't just a celebration of spring, it was a medieval pregnancy guide for a teenage bride. Goya's Witch's Sabbath wasn't just a spooky scene, it was a coded attack on the Spanish Inquisition. And Van Gogh's Wheatfield with Crows, that wasn't just a landscape, it was a suicide note in paint, his final scream of loneliness. Here's the thrilling part: you don't need to be an art historian to play detective. Next time you see a painting, slow down, look closer. Why is there a bloody knife in Artemisia Gentileschi's Judith angled toward her signature? Why did Seurat hide prostitutes in his seemingly proper La Grande Jatte? The clues are there, and now you know how to spot them. Art is a puzzle, and every viewer gets to piece it together differently. So, what's your theory? Maybe you've noticed something strange in a famous artwork that nobody talks about. Drop it in the comments, we're all detectives here. And to send you off with a final jolt, check out this split-screen reveal. On one side, the paintings as the world sees them. On the other, their secrets laid bare. The Mona Lisa's hidden landscape, the skull in Holbein's Ambassadors, Frida Kahlo's surgical scars in the two Fridas, all the mysteries we've uncovered, side by side with the originals. It's proof that art never stops talking, you just have to listen. If this deep dive into art's hidden stories fascinated you, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. There are centuries of secrets still waiting to be uncovered, and we'll be here to crack them open together. Until next time, keep looking closer, because the most ordinary brushstroke might just be the biggest clue.